Thanks for joining us. His story is one that reads like a fairy tale, from the ghettos right to the top. Prime Minister Gaston Brown is with us on Turning Point International. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
An absolute pleasure.
And thank you for allowing us into your wonderful space. It speaks of history, it speaks of so much class, and I have to confess, I'm nervous. My legs are shaking, my hands are shaking, you know. But your beginnings, Prime Minister, wasn't so opulent. What are your memories? Now, I know this is a story you've told many a time. This is a question you've been asked 1,000 times. But when you think back to growing up with your grandmother in what we call the ghetto, what are the pictures that come to mind? What are the emotions you feel when you look back?
Opulent, or opulence for that matter, is a total hyperbole. I mean, I lived among was the poorest among the poor. So that I actually lived in extreme poverty. In fact, I would have had at least a couple of near-death experiences as well. I was told by my mom that as a youth, I almost died. And she said to me she had even given up on me because I was so sick as a child, to the extent I actually walked when I was 4 years old and started school at age 8. It was my late great-grandmother, Catherine Watkins, who, when I was apparently maybe about 3 or 4 years old, took me to live with her in the ghetto in Grace Farm. Now, Antigua and Barbuda has 2 primary ghetto areas, Point and Grace Farm. And I've had the distinction of living in both ghettos. So I consider myself to be a multi-ghettoist. So I had the opportunity to live with my great-grandmother, who was born in 1894. And poor, partially blind, and illiterate. And when I say illiterate, in fact, whenever she went to the bank to withdraw monies, she had to use her thumbprint. I mean, not even her name she could write properly, because she was born in 1894. Slavery was abolished in, 1834?
Right.
So it would have taken at least another century before individuals started to, get a significant amount of education. In fact, it was only until in the 1950s, 60s that we saw an improvement in educational standards, where we had more primary schools, more secondary schools. So,
Prime Minister, let me ask you, as I read about you, and even as you're talking now, what's glaringly obvious that's missing is your father or male figures.
Well, I'm a product of a single-parent family and had a deadbeat father, someone who was very irresponsible and paid no attention to his children, did not provide for them. So I had a situation in which my mentally ill mother is the one who actually cared for myself and my siblings. In fact, there are times when she could not work because of her mental illness. But notwithstanding, she still provided for us. She worked. And I have to say it's by the grace of God why we are still here today, myself and our siblings. All of us, incidentally, have fared very well, even though we grew up in a single-parent home with a mentally ill mother.
Now, you say the grace of God, and it's a fantastic thing. We hear that a lot from preachers, not from heads of states. But what was your first? When did you first become aware or cognizant of this God person and His grace?
Well, incidentally, my mother was actually a practicing Christian before she became mentally ill. So as a youth, at age 9, 10, 11, I had to go to church on a regular basis. I had to go to Sunday school. So from an early age, I was exposed to Christian principles and certainly became a believer from a very early age.
But what I'm intrigued to know, though, is this was the environment you grew up in, and usually they'll say the environment you're in dictates who you become.
True.
What gave you the audacity to believe that you could come out of that to become someone who studied, to become a banker, to become the #1 citizen in the principality? How dare you? Where'd that come from?
I'm not sure. I imagine it was intrinsic in the sense that I don't think I ever had any doubt about my natural progression. And for some reason, I never developed any bad habits. Was never involved in the use of any form of drugs, marijuana, alcohol. I had very positive ethics, and at the same time, I had a very good work ethic. So I always felt as a youngster that education was a key to success and certainly to get out of abject poverty, that I had to educate myself. So that was one of the firm values that I had as a youth. Was very positive, even though there are times when I had no food, literally had to go to school hungry. I was still a very jovial, very positive child, to the extent that my peers did not even know exactly what was happening with me. In fact, there's someone who assumed that perhaps I was from a middle-class home. It's only when you looked at my clothing and so on, you recognize he must be very poor. I mean, I had shoes that were literally bursting at the seams. At one point at secondary school, I literally had 2 shirts and 1 pant. And I have to tell you, we had to make sure that at least maybe every other day that I'm washing as a youth, because as I said to you earlier, my mom was mentally ill. So myself, my sister Blondell, and another sibling, we literally had to look after ourselves. And I was actually the oldest, so I had to take on some level of responsibility. And I think, too, that would have helped in my maturity, in the sense that I also had to care not only for my mother, but also for my siblings.
Prime Minister, some of the things you describe is what many of us would recognize, because I remember going to school with holes in my shoes, even though I came from a good background. I remember people laughing at me because my uniform wasn't quite like everybody else. But there's so much more we want to explore with you, even though our time is limited. And I really want to find out about your life as a Prime Minister. How your faith informs the things you do. But please stay with us, because I want to take a breath. On Turning Point International, Honourable Gaston Brown, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, telling his story, giving us his journey.